Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody for coming to join us today here in the room and online on this really auspicious day with this incredibly important report that you have all now been able to view. And what we're going to do in this panel is look very specifically at how disruptive technologies will be impacting the workplace and some of the solutions that our brilliant panel members are going to offer you so that you can take home something really specific. In representing the City of London Corporation, we act very much as enablers and facilitators across this area, and we're founding partners of the FSSC. Skills are really obviously absolutely vital to us, and the Women Pivoting to Digital Taskforce is simply one area where we've worked on a solution to talent within this space, trying to look at people that may be not aware that they have talent to help us move forward and can perhaps transition from some of the roles that are lost to AI. So that's my example, where I'm going to ask each of the panel to start off, and with Mark first, is really within their own areas, introduce themselves. I should have said we'll take questions afterwards either through the app or from the floor. But each of the panel members, starting with Mark, to introduce themselves and to really say perhaps some of the things that have surprised them about the way in which the workforce is being disrupted, and some of where they are starting to identify the needs. So Mark.
Morning everyone, so Mark Jackson, Head of Future Workforce at Nationwide Building Society. I've been at Nationwide for close to 7 years, and then again, a good example linking to what Mark mentioned around bringing in from other sectors. I've come from technology sectors, aviation, broadcasting, you name it. I've ended up doing all of it. So you don't have to have kind of grown up and worked around financial services. So I think there is a big reskilling piece that we're seeing, and actually AI as a key part of it in terms of speeding up that learning and actually that whole process. I think the bit I'm not surprised about from an AI trend perspective is actually the sheer amount of investment we're seeing in terms of different organisations and different sectors. But actually it's the level of success and adoption that is probably the surprise, in that, and again I'm sure it's coming up in the report and you see a lot of it generally externally, is that you don't have so many use cases out there of it being completely effective. So for me it is all around how do you get it as successful and adopted as possible for ultimately your customers in whatever organisation you're in, but then also from that workforce colleagues perspective. And I think it's moving now from a Gen AI where people think of it as you're using a ChatGPT, a Copilot type of tool, to an agentic solution. So how can it get closer to the work that you are doing and speeds up the process? So less around it will take away the jobs and the skills. Actually, it enhances what you can therefore do and your output, and then ultimately to serve your customers better.
So important. Peter.
Yeah, I'm Pete Horrell. I'm the UK chairman at Fidelity International. Prior to my non-executive career, I did various CEO roles in the wealth and investment management space. Yeah, so AI, my sort of top level reflections on things that are surprising me, the change, etc. In many ways, you know, everything I've learned in terms of leadership experience, yeah, of course you've got to be authentic and honest and tell people as it is, but it is always in many ways about moving from a burning bridge to a promised land, and how you get there as a team and why that's great for the organization and great for individuals. And AI is no different at a sort of top level in that respect. But in terms of a leadership challenge, I suppose the things that have surprised me is it's much more difficult to define what that looks like, and therefore the leadership challenge to be very flexible and curious about taking people on that journey needs to be really demanding within organizations. And if I just brought that to life as a quick illustration up front, rather than take too much time on the panel now, you know, the way in which technology and coding and software engineering has changed over the recent past is phenomenal. If you told me 10 years ago about the need for coding and software engineering being radically transformed to where the knowledge of coding in its sense had kind of fallen through the floor in terms of the demand for that, and the way in which AI could assist excellent engineers to do way more, way quicker, because it's brilliant at coding, I would have been utterly astonished 10 years ago.
Thank you. And Sara?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sara Belchamber. I'm a partner in our people consulting team at KPMG, and I lead our org and people transformation area in financial services. In terms of the trends I'm seeing, I think it's fair to say AI really is everywhere. I work with lots of different financial services organisations, and it's fair to say that whether it be some experimental pilots or starting to roll out some technology like Copilot through to advanced use cases enterprise-wide, this certainly is something that everyone is considering. And our recent CEO report said it's a top priority from an investment perspective for 81% of the chief executives. I guess what maybe is a bit more surprising is that 75% of organisations aren't seeing a return on their AI investment. So I think there's, at the moment, quite a strong focus on how capacity can be released, but perhaps not such a focus on how to really use that capacity and get that return on investment as a result.
Thank you. An important message, Lauren.
Morning, everyone. I'm Lauren White. I'm the Skills, Talent and Leadership Development Manager at Ageas UK, and my job does exactly what it says on the tin. I am the definition of someone that joined in an entry-level role. So initially joined Ageas in our claims function and have held various different roles in the organisation since then. And of course, one of the challenges we're seeing now is the impact of AI and various other technologies on the availability of those entry-level roles. So it's something I'm particularly passionate about in terms of how we maintain that pipeline of entry-level talent into the organisation in a different way. I would say the thing that surprised me most, as someone who doesn't profess to be particularly technologically savvy either, is the sheer rate of change and the pace at which we're having to adapt. We're in the midst of a huge organisational transformation, bringing 3 different organisations together, and we're having to sift through that complexity at pace to maintain stability for our colleagues and customers. At the same time, we've got an external landscape that's shifting quicker than ever. So yeah, that would be mine.
Thank you, Lauren. And picking up that point about the pace of change, Mark, the report describes the adoption of AI over recent years as enthusiastic but cautious. Could you say to our audience what's enthusing you, and on the counter side to that, where perhaps you're treading with caution?
It's probably quite a good phrase to use, so I definitely would be where I would put it in terms of enthusiastic, but with elements of caution, or even just with governance. So enthusiasm would be, from a customer perspective, how you could be served differently or get to a quicker solution and you feel as informed as possible. Or again, the phrase we typically use is you are meeting the customer where they are and in the moments that matter. So in a way, the most important piece is actually how do you get those customers to adopt the technology without necessarily forcing it upon them. You have to drive them down a specific channel, or even just in general a digital channel. So kind of even my own personal reflection, I've used it in other talks before. Think about the first time that maybe you went and got a mortgage, and actually that is such a big life moment for you. It's one of the biggest assets that you'll have or you'll go after. And actually in that moment, and what I did, I went into Nationwide. Other mortgage providers are available, of course. I went into the Nationwide branch. I got served by one of our kind of mortgage reps and helped me through the process, me and my wife, and then they talked us through. And as much as I thought I probably understood it really well, I needed that human interaction to help me with that process. And then as I've gone through and I've had to kind of remortgage and do different parts of my mortgage statement, then I've interacted much more in a digital nature to it. So my kind of journey has gone along with the kind of digital change as well. And again, what you hear from, whether it's Nationwide or others in the banking sector, is that you do now have this embedded within ChatGPTs and other tools, and actually you can get that advice. So that's fine. But put yourself back in the shoes of when you first took out that mortgage. Are you really that comfortable using a language model to then show up with the mortgage that you want to go after? Actually, you probably still want to physically go to a branch or call someone on a contact centre. So the human behaviour element is still there, but especially in those moments that matter. So the adoption piece is key for me. And that's from a customer perspective with all the different kind of banking products that are out in the market. But then you've also got the colleague lens on it. So if you are therefore serving those customers, whether it's on a mortgage basis, it's current accounts, for example, how enabled are you to use that technology so that you can serve those customers better, that you're not having to use multiple processes, different technologies or systems that you need to key into systems. So the key thing for me is it's enthusiasm, but be really careful of just chucking the technology on there because it's available and you can pay for it. It's get the kind of those learned use cases and actually get the users to adopt it. You need those really good cases of where it is being used, and then bring along the workforce, bring along the customers with you.
Thank you, Mark. And Sarah, Mark again mentioned pathways into the sector, and with the nature of the workplace changing, people are feeling quite confused about where the whole pathways into the sector are going, and particularly faced with the retirement, coincidentally and otherwise, of a lot of people leaving the sector. I mean, what are your feelings about how pathways into the FPS sector need to be redesigned in order to maximise talent in a world of AI?
Well, AI is fundamentally changing how work is done, what the composition of work is. Tasks that can be done by AI versus tasks that need to be done by humans. And so key to this is really understanding what that mix looks like and how to then redesign roles around the new set of tasks and the new skills that are going to be needed. So, you know, this clearly presents a big challenge for entry points into our sector. If you just take early careers, which I know is, you know, quite a hot topic because they naturally are roles which are more exposed to opportunities for AI automation. Really, those entry points need to be redesigned and career pathways for from that point onward redefined. And what that looks like is probably different for every role. You know, perhaps it's the entry-level role is now managing a team of agents, for example, you know, supervising them, training them, performance managing them, or it could be anything. I know at KPMG, certainly our graduates are the roles who tend to do more of the analytical work. So again, some of that we can now do with AI. So it's definitely something that we're also considering. And you know, my personal view is it creates a great opportunity for our graduates because they can then have more exposure to the work that they might have done slightly further along their career. So things like, you know, managing projects and building relationships with our clients, or the core consulting skills around, you know, facilitation and presenting and so on. So I think it's about reshaping what the roles are and then working out what the opportunities are at entry level to then grow their careers.
Thank you. Peter, what about board buy-in? Because there'll be a lot of people sitting in the room today, in fact, here in the room today, thinking, this is all very well, but what happens if our board don't buy into this? What happens if they don't set the strategic direction to enable the rest of us to get on with what we know that we need to do in this space? I mean, how do you think the traditional idea of the board role and setting the strategic direction of a company might be affected here?
Yeah, I mean, without being too flippant, I mean, if your board don't buy into it in terms of the transformation that's coming down, then I'd get out quick because you're not going to be here. It is that fundamental in terms of the change. I suppose the being slightly more, well, that is a serious point, but I suppose if you think about the role of the board, I mean, the most important characteristic I look for in board members is curiosity. And in many ways, as a non-executive and a board member, it's a sort of privileged role to do, because you actually, you're being paid and asked to be curious and ask questions and challenge and support. And in many ways, you have miles more time and ability to kind of reflect on that than you do when you're doing an exec job, which is 24/7, and the execution and the challenge of getting stuff done can really kind of swamp what you're doing. So the board has a really, really important role in being curious and ensuring that it is pushing the boundaries of what's happening, educating itself, having strategy sessions. There's loads that we've done in that regard, and supporting the leadership across the organisation. I'd also say, coming back to my point around burning bridges and promised lands, as soon as you do start communicating with your teams in an honest way around that transformation and the criticality of changing it, you better follow up really quickly about the way in which you're going to support people from getting from the burning bridge to the promised land, because otherwise they're not going to stay with you. And there's lots of things that you can do in demonstrating the support, the training, the commitment, and as a board, you can sign up to the FSSC Compact to demonstrate, we're serious about this. So I would encourage those that are interacting with boards to use those things that are out there. Final thing I'd say is, look, the pace of implementation and the way we're using AI at Fidelity, it's everywhere. But as a board and those that are, getting the balance right, many of the challenges are about how you get pace, flexibility, rapid decision making embedded across your organizations, how you're curious and changing and challenging and all those kind of things. But at the same time, you've got to work really hard about things that don't change and things that need to be managed very carefully. So accountability, I don't suggest any of you who've met with FCA or been scrutinized by FCA or had meetings with FCA around things that have gone wrong or right or anything. I've had many over my career, but saying, oh, it was the machine that came up with the answer is not going to get you very far. And the accountability for what is changing, what is represented from a client point of view, the quality of the data, the quality of the output, those accountabilities don't change from a board level down. They don't change in terms of the functions. And your training and support for an organization in embedding that right balance is a really tough thing to do. You can't have AI outside the organization, which is not auditable and transparent, but everyone has a super powerful AI sitting in their pocket that they use outside the organization. So as a simple area, you've got to get it into the organization, overseen, encourage people to be curious, enthuse people about the journey to the promised land, and support them in doing that, and remain curious and flexible, because that's everyone's job, whether you're exec or non-exec.
And almost going to the opposite end of the spectrum, Lauren, going back to what you were saying about the impact on entry-level roles, a lot of discussions that I'm picking up at the moment are about how HR may have to change, how the way in which we look at job roles may have to change to more skill-based roles. How's that impacting your organisation, and what direction is your thinking going in that space?
Yeah, so it's not too long ago that we were in a place where we had big contact centre type environments, claims, customer service type roles. And certainly over the last, I would say 5 years or so, because of some of the digital optimisation Mark touched on, we've seen a real shift from that. Now, prior to that, we were at a point where we were sort of forecasting attrition to bring big groups of new starters in to fulfil that demand. We simply don't need to do that in the same way now, because the attrition is being offset by digital optimization to some point. So what then happens? What then becomes the route into the organization for those people? Now, you could argue that that demand has shifted somewhere else. So just last week, our talent acquisition team were dealing with a big campaign for data type roles, and I use that term deliberately broadly because there's a huge amount of variation within that, and actually that requirement may evolve again over the coming period, so you need to retain a bit of flexibility. So I think rather than the place we were in a few years ago, which was forecasting which particular roles we would need more of and scheduling accordingly, we're now in a place where we know we will have a broad requirement for a particular skill. We need to be far more proactive in pipelining that in, so often pipelining and bringing that skill into the business before the individual is fully productive, because there's an element of upskilling to be done. And yeah, retaining some flexibility in terms of exactly where you deploy them. Something else we're being deliberately focused on, as well as sort of defining our early careers proposition, how we can better use things like the skills and growth levy to upskill, to bring new talent into the business. We are also deliberately focused on internal mobility opportunities and what we can do for those entry-level employees that have got a deep understanding of our customer processes, which is hugely valuable when you're in some of those data roles and you're designing solutions to meet a particular challenge. How do we give them the technical skills they need so we can retain that talent for the future and continue to make use of their skill set?
Thank you, and presumably build the confidence in the workforce that there is a pathway, which I think people find quite challenging at the moment.
Absolutely.
So can we move from that to, I'm going to ask each of the panel, before we go to questions from the floor and questions that have come through on the app, to really focus on one specific piece of advice they would give to people to take away in each of your different areas today that could make an immediate difference, perhaps to the way in which their companies or their own workplaces tackle this really quite disruptive issue. So Mark, starting with you first.
Probably touching on what Pete and Lauren just talked around, particularly that entry level, in a way that AI, it should simplify and create efficiencies within most of our organisations, but what that is also adding in is an extra layer of complexity in most of our organisations. So in that example there that Lauren mentioned, we're finding that entry-level talent, you need a higher level of skills, particularly the human behaviours, and that is quite complex to then assess and bring into the organisation. So the key bit I would go back to is the adoption. So dealing with that extra level of complexity, even though you've got all of this technology now going in place that should make your organisation more efficient, think about the ways that you can get your colleagues, your workforce to adopt the technology, and think about the human behaviours. How do you get them to continuously learn and skill? Not you are brought into the organisation based on a single set of skills that won't change. Actually, we're bringing you in because we can see you've got the aptitude and ability to continually grow within your organisation.
I think critical, because the pace of change of the technology, it can't be a one-off, can it?
Yeah, exactly.
Peter?
I'm going to stick with my burning bridge, promised land kind of model. So actually, in many ways, when you're communicating and thinking about the change and how it impacts on people, I think it's really helpful to communicate those two sides. So if I think about our service centre, the kind of burning bridge issue is, in terms of pure phone up, respond, answer a factual question, that's a kind of burning bridge issue. That is going to fall in terms of the people demand for doing that. Now, the promised land aspect is, wow, with the tools that I can train, support, develop, flexibility, you can actually turn that service centre into miles more value add, proactive, curious, way further up the kind of help, guidance, who knows where regulated advice goes in the future, but kind of that's the sort of dichotomy that we're thinking about, and I think it's helpful to communicate it and think about it in those two ways. As you do that, be prepared for your people to be really demanding of how you're helping them get to that latter, which is a wonderful place to be. Having everyone demanding the support to implement that pace of change and the technology and the support that we all need to provide. You want the pull from the people. So dividing that thinking, and I could say the same on entry-level roles. It ain't going to be around putting together PowerPoints and presentations and doing the research, etc. But, wow, imagine if I can take entry-level talent and I can give it the equivalent of the experience of 15 years of advising clients in financial services. How do I transfer it? So that's what I'd say.
Brilliant. Sarah?
For me, it would be to treat implementing AI or digital technology as a workforce transformation, not, focusing on it being a technology implementation, or even thinking what we need to do here is some sort of digital skills enablement, but actually, and going back to the point I made at the start around most organisations not seeing the return on investment that they thought they would, setting out at the start, what is it that you really want to achieve from this? What do you want to use your capacity that you're creating in your organisation to do, and how are you going to measure that? And then you can look at what the work is to be done, what will be done by humans, and therefore how to redesign your people's roles, which will then inform what skills they need and you need to grow in your organisation. Because I think that is the key to that return on investment question.
Excellent, thank you. And Lauren?
Yeah, I would say as skills development professionals, there's an increasing need for us to get creative and do things differently to the way that we've done things previously. To do that, you need to be on the front foot and understand where the challenge is likely to emerge. We've talked at quite a broad level about the challenges organisations are facing, and that will look different when you look across different teams within the organisation. So I would say it's really important that we stay close to organisational strategy, not just at the highest level, but the interpretation of that within different functions. Get proactive, see where the challenges are emerging, and then give yourself as much time as possible to head that off with something new.
Thank you, excellent, and a great point to go to questions. While we're waiting for microphones to come around the room, people to put their hands up in the room, please. There's a couple of questions, well, there's lots of questions. We're not going to make them all, I'm afraid, in 7 minutes. But there's lots of questions coming through on the app. Quite a few people obviously worried about their end-of-year bonuses because they're asking about, I think it was Peter mentioned earlier about a lot of the work with AI at the moment isn't transforming through into financial gain, if you like, for businesses. And what about people working with clients, the client interface, where traditionally their whole workplace structure, which is something that Sara has touched on, has been centred around the direct interface with clients and therefore the financial bonuses that come from that. And it's a massive area, but just to any of you, your thoughts on that. Sara, perhaps did you want to start on that? Is your area?
I think linked to bonuses is how you're measuring people, and this is an area which I think needs really careful thought, because I'm sure everyone can reflect on when some targets have been set and they have had unintended consequences and driven behaviours which they weren't meant to. And I think, linked to this is, with AI, there's a theory that, you used to do 10 of a thing and now you can do 100 of a thing. And so now the target for that is you've got to do 100 of a thing. And where the risk comes in that is suddenly there's a pressure there. And actually a big part of people's roles is to quality assure, check, validate, ultimately have accountability, as you said, Pete, for the outputs that are being produced. So I think there's something there around thinking about how your metrics are driving behaviours, making sure there are not unintended consequences. For example, people rushing to sign things off because they've got to hit their 100 target of a thing. And then I think, that naturally then starts to flow through into bonuses and performance and reward linked to how people are performing against those metrics.
Interesting. Do we have questions from the floor? No? If not, I think there's a question here from the lady here.
Hi. It's just a thought about behavioural skills. So I get that you could get an early person joining the workforce and you can give them 15 years of worth of knowledge, but they wouldn't have had 15 years of experience and therefore they're not going to present. Obviously, you read a lot about social media and click, click, click. So what's your view on the behavioural change that early career people will have and present with in the workforce, and how we might tackle that? Because that would need to complement the technology that they have.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So that's something that we are really keen on. So again, feel quite strongly about that. It's not just the technology skills and the sort of core technical skills. It's all of the behavioural skills that enable those. So it's not even just entry-level roles. It's how do you make sure that people's critical thinking skills don't erode when they're increasingly reliant on things like ChatGPT. How do we ensure that people can still influence in the right way and that sort of thing? We also have a bit of a challenge, I suppose, and this isn't just a product of AI. I think it's just generally the shift to hybrid working and all of those sorts of things with new employees joining the business, just understanding the expectation of a corporate environment and how you behave in that sort of environment. Empathy, rapport building, all of those sorts of things. So I think it's definitely a challenge. It's something that you can't unlock the potential in the technology in without addressing as well. So again, it's something that we've got plans around.
And I've got a lot of questions here on education and movement from mainstream education to entry-level skills and how people are going to progress through the organisations. I think I'm going to put all of those together in terms of perhaps Mark or Peter, if you had to pick one thing where you think companies could really give people at entry-level confidence to feel that they can make a contribution and therefore that particular company is worthwhile and they will be looked after and they will be given the skills and perhaps a lifelong learning pathway. But what would you advise there?
I guess my one piece of advice would be it's experiences over exams, linking back to education. So as much as possible, you are trying to bring in all of that previous experience, not necessarily that they've had that previous job in there. It's actually you bring in all of that life experience they come in with, even from like a social mobility aspect. Because actually the real risk we've got is that the harder you find it to get into work right now, it can become even more polarized because of technology and your access to technology. So as much as possible, how can we open up as a sector different types of work experiences to give them and the experience of those behaviors in the workplace to mean that they can adapt and pick up the technical skills, which, as you mentioned, are going to keep changing anyway. So there's less around the technical skills that you might get from sometimes a formal apprenticeship or going to university. It's actually, can you just get your foot in the door somewhere to pick up that experience, and you will continue to learn once you're in the organisation. So I think just that piece of experience, it's the decision making, it's the resilient skills. That's how you get into careers such as working in collections and recoveries, how you work in economic crime. It isn't because you suddenly thought, oh, this is always what I wanted to go and do. You need that experience to then just pick up on that. And over time, you learn that you love doing that job. You pick up the empathy, etc.
Peter, I'm going to use the last minute to change my question to you because it's something that you touched on earlier. And I think going back to where we are in the middle of the city financial, a very good, profound question here about the adoption of AI again versus risk management and the whole issue of litigation around that. Now you've got less than a minute, half a minute now to tackle that, but some key advice there.
Yeah, I mean, AI is transforming risk and compliance in all those areas, and we're actively using it in those areas now. But in terms of your skills, your scrutiny, the aspects of how you supervise that, you need to understand the different capabilities that are out there in terms of different types of AI, other tools, how that interacts with human beings to make sure your accountability is delivered and you're satisfied that the answers are the right ones. So I wouldn't just chuck a general LLM that's been trained on find anything in the internet into a RegTech solution. But for example, the way that you're starting to see that transformation is you might have an AI that's trained on something which is relatively general, spotting patterns, predictive in there. You might use a specific data set on another AI that has been trained that you can then check the output from the first AI. You might use a rules-based engine that is applying compliance rules specific to the country in which you're operating, and you'll have a human oversight that is managing that team of those different agents. So you can check it through different tools, different AIs, different capabilities. So you've got to be really smart about using the right AI, the right data quality, the right processes, the right accountabilities, and linking that through a person who's accountable at the end of the day.
An excellent 60-second answer, thank you. So a huge thanks to our panel, Mark, Peter, Sarah and Lauren.